Moff Gideon has been the main antagonist in The Mandalorian, but Season 3 seemingly put an end to that. Brace yourselves guys, because he could be back for Season 4.
That's not Gideon. Those are his clones.
But perhaps not in the way you're thinking.
What's it gonna be this time?
We'll start by looking at what Moff Gideon's real plan was in Season 3, how the foundations are already set for his return, and what his involvement could look like in Season 4 and so on. Because in Season 3 we learnt Moff Gideon escaped Imperial capture, he never went to trial, and instead he went back to his base on Mandalore to perfect his cloning experiments, operating largely in the shadows alongside the other Imperial remnants. But as before, the Mandalorians, led by Din Djarin and Bo-Katan, landed on Mandalore and discovered the Imperial base. After that point, he didn't last very long at all, and he made a catalogue of errors to ensure he was going to be wiped out from the face of the galaxy alongside his life's work. Although not everyone is convinced that Gideon actually died in Season 3, and it all begins with a simple moustache. But hear me out, Gideon learns from his mistakes and he learns from the mistakes of others, such as Palpatine, the Camoans, the Jedi, and the Mandalorians, and he builds on them mistakes to make sure they never happen to him, or never happen to him again at least. Take the Dark Troopers for example. They were sliced up pretty easily by Luke Skywalker in Season 2, and this time around he's removed the machine and put himself inside the next gen Dark Trooper suit, and it's made out of Beskar. Therefore it's not going to be easily struck down by a Jedi if one decided to appear and save the day again. And although the Dark Trooper suit was pretty cool, that wasn't his ultimate plan. The clones have always been his plan ever since Season 1, which can be evidenced with his pursuit of Grogu, and also in Season 2 when we see the clone in the tank on the facility on Navarro, and also his involvement with Dr. Pershing and having him around so often. Now, he always wanted to create a Force-sensitive clone army, which would give him total galaxy domination. Now, it's quite clear here Gideon is a clever guy, but this is supposedly the same guy who left himself on Mandalore as the angry Mandalorians arrived looking to take over their homeworld. But what's more, he also left his life work, an army of Force-sensitive clones on Mandalore, to be destroyed if it all goes south as well. Is he a clever guy who just had a dull moment, or is there a method to this madness? Now this brings us into the argument of if Gideon in Season 3 was actually the real Gideon, or if he was just one of the clones. Now we need to look at it from both sides, but let's look at it from the first point of view of this being the real Gideon. Now the big point here that everyone's talking about is the moustache, but I want to point out here that he could have just had a shave. I mean, Anakin, Kylo Ren, Palpatine, so many others in the movies never had facial hair. Does that mean they couldn't have grown it? Shaving was a thing in Star Wars. I mean, Luke certainly could grow a beard in the sequels. I don't think he inherited that from Padme. Now, another clue as to why this Gideon was the real Gideon is because he didn't have the Force. Some think that he actually admitted on screen in the season final, and I do feel that this Gideon would have used the Force if he had it, especially when he was losing in the last moments. And Gideon in the season final had all of Gideon's memories. He knew very well who Din Djarin was and what they were up to. He knew about Bo-Katan, and he knew that the factions didn't get along. Now, there's a good chance I do think this was the real Gideon. But even if it is, it doesn't rule out his return in the future, which we're going to get onto in a moment. But let's look at the idea that he was a clone. Now, this Gideon in the final could have been one of the earlier experiments, one of the earlier clones, one that was created without the Force because they hadn't perfected that technique just yet. And it could have very well been implanted with Gideon's memories. And the whole idea of this Gideon clone was to actually make it be like Gideon, perhaps as a decoy while the real Gideon hides out somewhere else. Now, if Gideon has clones available, wouldn't you use them to save your own skin? If you've got unlimited clones at your disposal and there's only one real you, which one would you send in when things get a little bit tense? Now, this is assuming that the real Gideon is still alive. Who's to say the clone that was created, whether it was Force sensitive or not, might have had Gideon's other attributes enhanced? Gideon did say the best pieces of him to make these clones. Now, the best piece about Gideon would arguably be his brain, his mind. And what if that was advanced to such a level that it actually surpassed the thinking of the real Moff Gideon, and then this clone version saw the real Gideon as just being a weakness? The fact that the real Gideon is controlling the whole operation, but this clone sees a vision clearer than he does. And then the clone believed his own plans were better and simply took him out or imprisoned the real Gideon. You know how them AIs take over the world in the movies? Well, it could be something along them lines. Now, one of the things that really sticks out to me here is that the clones were allowed to be discovered, and Din Djarin was allowed to interact with them, or at least be in the room with them, completely left to his own devices. Why would Gideon, or even a clone Gideon, risk that? What does that tell you? Now, what this tells me is the clones in that room weren't Gideon's endgame, and he was willing for them to be destroyed to hide his real plan. Now what he wants to do here is lure the Mandos into a false sense of security, thinking that all the clones, the project, the whole idea is dead, and potentially Gideon's dead alongside it. Because what that would then achieve for Gideon is the New Republic are no longer looking for him. The Empire also thinks he's off the board, and we know that Gideon wasn't working too closely with the Empire with his true intentions, and he's now further in the shadows than ever before, likely with more clones ready to go on other planets and other facilities elsewhere. There's a saying, don't put all your eggs in one basket. Gideon's not a silly guy. We saw the cloning on Navarro and on Mandalore. That's already 2 planets. Who's to say he hasn't got some being created elsewhere? Why else would he risk his big plan coming to an end like that after all, allowing Din Djarin to go and see the clones without him being there? Knowing that Din Djarin is firmly against Gideon at this point, he'd probably want to destroy any clones that he came across. Going back to what I said at the beginning there, Gideon learns from his mistakes. He likely knows of Palpatine's cloning plan and the whole thing that the other Imperial remnants are working on, and that's why they wanted the cloning research for themselves, and he probably appreciates it. He realises though, however, that the pitfall was not having the clones on hand ready at the time of Palpatine's demise. If that was the case, then the Emperor would have never left the galaxy. The Empire wouldn't have fell on that day, he would have just popped up somewhere else and governed from another ship effectively. Now the bottom line here is Gideon's grand plan to be destroyed by accident in a few quick moments by Din Djarin, and him to be so negligent in the first place, is a big red flag. You don't get this far in the Empire by, how do I say, being an idiot. This tells me that it wasn't his final card. Regardless if the real Gideon's dead, and the one in season 3 was just a clone or not, he's going to have more of them clones hidden away elsewhere in the galaxy, or at the very least, the knowledge and materials needed to recreate them in the future, safely stashed away from a time that he might need them. Now my personal take on this is that the Gideon in season 3 wasn't a clone, and he did actually stay on Mandalore to fight, and the reason he did this is because he was too overconfident in his own abilities and what he was capable of, and he thought that now he's got the Dark Trooper costume, he was effectively unstoppable. He could match the Mandalorians, but with it being made out of Beskar, he would also be prepared for a lightsaber attack if a Luke Skywalker or another Jedi decided to save the day. And then Gideon ultimately perished in a fire, or did he? But that's a video for another time. But with that being said, Gideon will be returning, I think, in season 4, perhaps in other shows going forwards in the Mandoverse, or perhaps even in some of the movies in the form of his clones. Now, I do not think for one second the clones on Mandalore are all the ones he had. Why would you leave them all on Mandalore? Why wouldn't you scatter them around the galaxy? Especially because he was suspecting the Mandalorians were going to return to their homeworld and attempt to take it back. Why not have some backups elsewhere? Perhaps these clones could even be picked up by Thrawn and used in the future, and it would be a way to bring Giancarlo Esposito back, and it would kind of be a way to not overuse the real character of Moff Gideon but still have him around, but this time as a Force-sensitive soldier in a Force-sensitive clone army. Perhaps they lay in hibernation elsewhere undiscovered until many years into the future when someone who's taken an interest in Gideon's work begins to investigate what he was actually up to. Do you think there's likely more Gideon clones out there, not on Mandalore but on other planets? Let me know in the comments down below. Remember to subscribe if you're new to the channel. Leave a like. I'll catch you in the next one. This is the way.